Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss these thrilling mafia love stories. The city lights of New York flickered against the sleek glass of the high-rise, casting long shadows down the streets below. Inside the grand penthouse, Alessia Hart adjusted the hem of her shimmering emerald dress in front of the mirror, taking a deep breath. Tonight was the gala, the one night every influential figure in the city would be under the same roof, and Alessia needed to make an impression, but not the kind she was dreading. She had been warned. Twice. Stay out of trouble, her best friend had said. And don't get noticed by him. But Alessia had always been stubborn, and tonight, she wasn't hiding. She had worked too hard for this moment to shrink back into the shadows. As she descended the grand staircase, heels clicking against marble, the chatter of the gala filled the room. The chandeliers glittered, reflecting the elegant faces around her. And then, she saw him. Vincenzo Romano. The man whose name alone could silence a room. The mafia boss who ruled half the city's underground with an iron fist. He was leaning against the bar, eyes sharp, calculating, and impossibly dangerous. His tailored suit made him look untouchable, and yet, Alessia felt his gaze lock onto her the moment she stepped into the hall. For a heartbeat, she froze, unsure whether to turn away or confront the storm waiting in his eyes. But it was too late. He had noticed. Alessia. His voice was low, a growl that sent shivers down her spine. She turned, forcing a polite smile, but she could see the tension in his jaw. "Where do you think you're going in that dress?" She opened her mouth to reply, but he cut her off. "Who do you think you're flirting with?" His voice was laced with jealousy, sharp as a knife. The room seemed to shrink around them. Conversations halted mid-sentence as other guests sensed the storm brewing. Alessia's heart raced. She had seen his temper before, the dark side that could make even the bravest men hesitate. But she wasn't afraid, not completely. There was something intoxicating about the way he demanded attention, the way the room bent around his presence. I'm just going to the gala," she stammered, trying to maintain her composure. But the slight tremor in her voice betrayed her. Vincenzo's eyes narrowed, and he stepped closer, a predator closing in. "You think this is a game?" he snapped. "Do you have any idea how dangerous it is for you to stand there, dressed like that, attracting every eye in the room?" Alessia swallowed hard. She had been warned, yet here she was, caught in the crossfire of his jealousy and his control. "I'm not trying to attract anyone," she whispered. He studied her, his dark eyes searching, and for a fleeting second, something softer flickered in his gaze. But only for a second. The moment passed, replaced by that familiar tension, that dangerous magnetic pull. "We'll see about that," he muttered, turning away, but his presence lingered, suffocating and undeniable. Little did Alessia know, tonight was only the beginning. The gala was a stage, but their real story, full of secrets, jealousy, and a fire neither of them could deny, was about to ignite. And once it started, there would be no turning back. The gala continued around them, oblivious to the silent storm brewing between Alessia and Vincenzo. Glittering chandeliers reflected off the crystal glasses, laughter and music filling the air, but for Alessia, the noise had faded into a distant hum. She could still feel his gaze on her, a weight pressing against her shoulders that made her both nervous and undeniably aware of him. Every step she took, every glance she stole toward him seemed to draw his attention even more. It was intoxicating, frightening, and confusing all at once. Alessia tried to navigate the crowd, weaving past the influential guests with a grace that masked the adrenaline racing through her veins. She had to remind herself to breathe. Being in the same room as Vincenzo Romano was one thing, but standing under the glare of the entire city's elite while he silently judged her was another. He didn't just watch, he studied. Every movement, every smile, every misstep. And Alessia knew he noticed everything. When she finally reached the balcony for some air, she let herself exhale, leaning against the railing to catch her breath. The city stretched below, lights twinkling like stars in a black ocean. The cool breeze on her face was a welcome relief, but it didn't last. She heard the familiar click of polished shoes behind her and froze. Enjoying the view. Vincenzo's voice was quiet, almost teasing, but his presence made her heart hammer in her chest. She turned slowly to face him, the tension between them thick enough to cut with a knife. His eyes, dark and intense, seemed to pierce straight through her. "Are just trying to escape me." Alessia swallowed, her voice barely audible. "I just needed some air." She tried to sound casual, but it was useless. He wasn't buying it. He never did. "Air," he echoed, stepping closer. The scent of his cologne, rich, dark, and commanding, enveloped her, making her weak at the knees. "You think the city is safe for you tonight? You think you can stand there, looking like that, without consequences?" His gaze flicked over her dress, sharp and possessive. Alessia wanted to argue, to tell him she wasn't looking for trouble, but she couldn't. There was something in the way he spoke, the intensity of his jealousy, that made words seem meaningless. Instead, she simply looked down, hoping to calm her racing heart. "You think you can just walk into my world and not understand the rules?" He continued, voice low and dangerous. "You don't know what you're getting yourself into." Alessia's pulse quickened. She had always been drawn to danger, but Vincenzo was a storm unlike anything she had ever faced. And she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. Before she could respond, a commotion inside the gala drew their attention. A man in a sharp suit had approached a wealthy guest, raising his voice in anger. The tension in the room shifted, guests whispering and glancing nervously. Vincenzo's expression darkened instantly, the predator in him awakening. Alessia had seen him in business negotiations, calm and commanding, but this was different. The moment danger approached, his instincts took over. "Stay close to me," he said abruptly, grabbing her arm and pulling her back inside before she could protest. Alessia's heart raced, not just from his strength, but from the raw intensity of his presence. Inside, the gala's elegant atmosphere clashed with the sudden threat, creating a tension so thick it was almost tangible. Vincenzo moved with purpose, his eyes scanning the room, calculating every possible outcome. Alessia tried to keep up, struggling to maintain her composure in heels that suddenly felt far too high. Her hand brushed against his, and the brief contact sent sparks through her, igniting a fire she couldn't control. She was painfully aware of the heat of his body, the sharpness of his focus, and the impossible magnetism that seemed to pull her toward him, even when every rational thought screamed otherwise. "Who was that?" she whispered when they reached a safer corner of the room, nodding toward the man who had caused the disturbance. "Trouble," Vincenzo said simply, his jaw tight. His eyes softened for the briefest moment as they flicked toward her, but only for a second before the steel returned. "And I don't allow trouble near you." Alessia felt her chest tighten, a mix of fear and something far more dangerous, desire. "I can handle myself," she insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. The truth was, she had never felt so small and exposed in her life, yet so captivated by one man. Vincenzo's presence was overwhelming, dominating every thought, every breath. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You think that dress gives you power?" he asked, a shadow of a smirk tugging at his lips. "It doesn't. Not here. Not with me." Alessia's cheeks flushed. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, but she was caught, trapped between her pride and the undeniable pull of this man who could control everything and everyone around him, yet seemed to be obsessed with her. The night stretched on, tension building with every passing minute. Alessia realized with a mix of thrill and dread that she had stepped into a world far more dangerous than she had imagined. And Vincenzo, jealous, possessive, and impossibly magnetic, was at the center of it all. As the gala began to wind down, Alessia knew one thing for certain: tonight was only the beginning. The walls Vincenzo had built around himself, the power and fear he wielded, could not contain the fire she had sparked in him. And she had no idea just how far that fire would reach, or how much danger it would bring into her life. The city lights glimmered below as she left the gala with him, the tension between them unspoken but electric. One thing was clear: nothing would ever be the same again. And Alessia, for better or worse, had just stepped into a world from which there was no escape. The night air outside Vincenzo Romano's penthouse was cold, sharp, and suffocating in a way that matched Alessia's racing thoughts. She had barely managed to keep her composure at the gala, but now, standing in the shadowed driveway, she felt the weight of the evening settling over her. Vincenzo's sleek black car idled nearby, tinted windows reflecting the city lights like dark mirrors. He opened the door for her, but before she could step inside, he stopped her with a hand on her elbow. "You think tonight was just about appearances?" he asked, voice low and dangerous. The words themselves were heavy, but the way he said them made Alessia shiver. He didn't need to raise his voice, his mere presence was enough to command her attention, to force her heart to pound faster. "You've stepped into my world, Alessia. And in my world, nothing is as simple as it seems." Alessia looked up at him, searching for any sign of the man who had briefly softened at the gala, but found only the sharp, commanding gaze of the Mafia boss she had heard so much about. The man whose name alone could silence a room. "I'm not afraid of your world," she said quietly, trying to sound braver than she felt. "I can handle whatever comes." Vincenzo's lips curved into a faint, dangerous smirk. "We'll see about that." He finally guided her into the car, the doors closing with a satisfying thud that seemed to seal them off from the rest of the city, and perhaps from safety itself. The ride was silent, the only sound the hum of the engine and the faint city noise in the distance. Alessia's mind raced, replaying the gala over and over, the way he had stared at her, the jealousy in his tone, the subtle threats wrapped in his protective instincts. She should have been terrified, and yet, there was something thrilling about it, a pull she couldn't resist. By the time they reached the penthouse, the city below had grown quiet. Vincenzo led her inside, the door shutting behind them with an almost ceremonial finality. The apartment was dimly lit, the glow from the skyline creating long shadows across the marble floors. Alessia felt exposed, vulnerable, yet strangely alive in the intensity of the moment. Vincenzo moved with precision, removing his jacket and draping it over a chair, every motion radiating control and confidence. "Sit," he commanded, pointing to a chair near the window. Alessia obeyed, heart still racing. Vincenzo paced slowly, his mind seemingly elsewhere, yet Alessia could feel his attention burning into her. "Do you have any idea what it's like to care about someone in my position?" he asked suddenly, stopping mid-step. His eyes bore into hers, dark and unreadable. "Every action you take, every glance you give, it's a potential threat, not just to you, but to me, to everything I've built." Alessia's stomach churned. She had expected danger, intrigue, perhaps even excitement, but not this, raw, unfiltered truth. "I didn't come here to be a threat," she whispered. I just wanted to enjoy the gala." Vincenzo's jaw tightened. "Enjoy," he echoed, voice sharp. "In my world, even enjoyment has consequences. And tonight, you drew attention, Alessia. You drew my attention. And that is dangerous for you." The words were simple, yet each carried the weight of a threat she couldn't ignore. She wanted to argue, to convince him she was careful, capable, but she knew it was useless. He didn't just care about appearances, he cared about control, about power, and now, impossibly, about her. There was a pause, heavy with unspoken tension. Alessia found herself studying him, realizing with a jolt just how close she was to danger and desire at the same time. Vincenzo had always been untouchable in her mind, a man of myth and fear. But now, standing in his private world, she could see the glimpses of something more complicated beneath the ruthless exterior: jealousy, protectiveness, obsession. And it terrified her. Before she could process her thoughts, Vincenzo approached and leaned against the balcony railing, his eyes scanning the city. "There are things you don't know," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Enemies, debts, deals, and people who would use you as leverage without a second thought." His hand brushed against hers accidentally, or perhaps intentionally, and Alessia's breath caught. The proximity was electric, dangerous, and she felt herself drawn into the storm of his world whether she wanted to or not. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, trying to mask the tremor in her voice. "Why me?" He turned to face her, eyes dark with intensity. "Because," he said simply, "I can't risk losing you. Not to them, not to anyone. You've stepped into my life, Alessia. And I don't know how to let go of someone I shouldn't care about." His admission was brief, almost a whisper, but the effect was devastating. Alessia's heart raced, conflicting emotions twisting inside her. She had felt attraction before, tension before, but never like this, raw, unfiltered, and dangerous. The tension didn't dissipate as the night wore on. Vincenzo's phone buzzed repeatedly, reminders of the Mafia empire he commanded, and each alert seemed to tighten the air between them. Alessia realized just how fragile her position was, and yet she couldn't stop herself from studying him, from being drawn to the same danger that made every nerve in her body scream. Hours passed. Words were few. Glances, touches, and unspoken threats dominated the room. Alessia understood one thing clearly. Nothing in Vincenzo's world was simple, and her presence had ignited a chain of events that neither of them could stop. She wasn't just a guest at a gala anymore. She was part of his world, jealousy, danger, and all, and that world was about to spill over into her life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. As the first light of dawn crept through the skyline, Alessia realized the night had changed everything. Vincenzo Romano, the untouchable, feared, and admired Mafia boss, had revealed a sliver of the man behind the myth, a man obsessed, jealous, and dangerously protective. And Alessia, despite every instinct screaming caution, felt herself drawn deeper into the fire, unable to turn away, unable to resist. The storm was only beginning, and Alessia knew with certainty that once it fully broke, there would be no turning back from the dangerous, intoxicating world she had entered. The morning sun barely penetrated the tall city skyline, but Vincenzo Romano was already awake, moving through his penthouse with a calculated precision that left no detail unattended. Alessia had spent the night in a guest room, but sleep had eluded her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his gaze from the gala, the sharp, possessive intensity that made her pulse race. And now, in the harsh light of day, she realized just how inescapable he had become. Vincenzo's phone buzzed relentlessly, pulling him from his thoughts. He ignored it at first, but the persistence forced him to glance at the screen. A single message, from a source he trusted only slightly more than the shadows he commanded: "She's being watched." Someone followed her last night. His jaw tightened, the calm mask slipping for a moment to reveal the storm underneath. Alessia had already entered danger by being near him, and now the threat was real and tangible. Alessia was in the kitchen when he stormed in, the aura of control and danger radiating from him like heat from a furnace. "Someone followed you," he said, voice low but commanding. Her heart froze. She hadn't even noticed anyone outside. Hadn't sensed any danger in the gala's chaos. "Who?" she asked, trying to mask the sudden panic rising in her chest. "Does it matter?" he snapped, stepping closer. The air around him seemed to thrum with authority and fury. "You're mine, Alessia, and anyone who dares to put a finger on you will answer to me." The possessiveness in his tone sent a shiver down her spine, equal parts thrilling and terrifying. She wanted to protest, to say she could handle herself, but the truth was, she was starting to realize just how vulnerable she had become. Vincenzo's dark eyes scanned hers, searching for any sign of defiance, and she found herself meeting his gaze, despite the fear and uncertainty. He was infuriating, impossible, yet impossible to look away from. "You think this is just a game?" he asked, voice dropping to a growl. "Do you understand what it means to be close to me? To walk into my world?" Alessia took a step back, trying to regain composure. I didn't realize," she started, but he interrupted. "You didn't realize because you're human, Alessia. You have a choice. You can walk away. You can leave before this world consumes you. But once you're in, there's no going back." His words were blunt, cold, yet beneath the edge was something else, a hint of desperation, a fear of losing her. Alessia felt her stomach twist, torn between the danger and the pull of something she couldn't explain. Before she could respond, Vincenzo moved toward the window, phone in hand. The message had been simple, but the implications were deadly. "She's being followed." He knew exactly who it was, and the sight of her in that message made his blood boil. Alessia watched as he typed, his fingers moving with precision, contacting people who were shadows themselves, people who obeyed without question. Every second passed like a lifetime, the weight of his power pressing down on her, suffocating yet strangely comforting. "Alessia," he said finally, turning to face her, his eyes dark and unreadable. "I need you to trust me. Do exactly as I say, and you'll survive tonight. Don't question me, don't interfere, just listen." His words were a command, but Alessia noticed the subtle vulnerability beneath the surface, the unspoken fear that she might walk away, that she might be hurt. Her heart raced. I trust you," she whispered, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. She had been drawn into his dangerous world, and there was no turning back. She could feel the walls of his empire pressing in around her, suffocating, yet she couldn't resist stepping closer. "Just tell me what to do." Vincenzo studied her, eyes scanning every inch of her face, searching for lies, hesitation, anything. After a moment, he nodded once, sharply, as if sealing a pact that neither of them could break. "Stay inside. Don't answer the door. Don't leave this building until I say it's safe." Alessia nodded, swallowing hard. She wanted to argue, to insist she could protect herself, but the truth was, she couldn't. Not against the shadows he commanded, not against the enemies that lurked just beyond the city lights. The hours dragged on, tense and suffocating. Alessia paced the penthouse, glancing nervously at the windows, every shadow outside seeming like a threat. Vincenzo remained a constant presence, silently watching, ensuring her safety but also making her acutely aware of the danger she had stepped into. Every glance, every brush of his hand, every protective command reminded her that she was no longer just a guest in his world, she was part of it, whether she wanted to be or not. By evening, Vincenzo had tightened security around the building, guards stationed strategically, entrances monitored, exits blocked. Alessia felt the weight of his obsession with her safety, the possessive intensity that both thrilled and frightened her. And yet, she couldn't deny the magnetic pull that drew her closer to him, even as the danger escalated. As night fell again, Alessia realized that the gala had been a prelude to something far larger and more dangerous. The first real threat had appeared, and Vincenzo's jealousy, protectiveness, and obsession were only beginning to surface. She had glimpsed a side of him that few ever did, the storm beneath the calm, the ruthlessness, the power, and the undeniable, intoxicating danger. And she knew one thing: there was no turning back now. She had stepped fully into his world, a world of shadows, secrets, and a possessive love that could destroy or protect her. The first threat was only the beginning, and Alessia's life, and heart, were about to be pulled into a whirlwind from which neither of them could escape. The city outside Vincenzo Romano's penthouse was alive with its usual chaos, unaware of the storm brewing within one of its tallest towers. Alessia sat by the window, the faint glow of streetlights painting her face in soft amber. She tried to focus on something mundane, a book, a cup of coffee, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the events of the past 2 days. The gala, Vincenzo's possessive glare, the threat that had followed her, it was all overwhelming, yet she couldn't deny the thrill that came with being at the center of it all. Every glance from Vincenzo, every sharp command, made her pulse race in ways she hadn't imagined possible. Vincenzo moved silently through the apartment, checking security monitors, speaking briefly into his phone, and issuing instructions to the shadows that protected him. Alessia watched him from across the room, realizing just how much control he wielded, not just over the city, but over her as well. His presence was suffocating, yet intoxicating. She tried to remind herself that this was dangerous, that being near him could cost her everything, but the pull was irresistible. He was a storm she couldn't escape, a force that both terrified and captivated her. Hours later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Vincenzo returned from a series of urgent calls, his expression dark and unreadable. Alessia could sense the tension radiating off him, the same intensity that had marked him since the gala. "They're closer than I thought," he said without preamble, his voice low and controlled, yet laced with warning. Alessia's stomach tightened. The threat wasn't just an abstract idea anymore, it was real, tangible, and heading straight toward her. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, betraying the fear she tried to hide. "Someone knows you're here," Vincenzo replied, his dark eyes scanning the room as if he could already see the enemy's approach. "And they're coming for you. You're not just in my world by choice anymore, you're in it because I said so. And now, I have to protect you, whether you like it or not." His words were sharp, precise, and terrifyingly final. Alessia felt a shiver run down her spine. She had stepped into a world she didn't fully understand, and there was no turning back. The tension in the apartment was almost unbearable. Alessia tried to distract herself, but every shadow outside the tinted windows seemed like a threat, every unexpected sound a potential enemy. Vincenzo's presence loomed over her constantly, a protective force that was both comforting and suffocating. She was beginning to understand the full weight of his jealousy and possessiveness, not just as a reaction to her beauty, but as a reflection of the danger that surrounded them both. Suddenly, the quiet was shattered by a knock at the door. Alessia froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked at Vincenzo, who moved instantly, his posture taut with alertness. "Stay back," he ordered, his voice a low growl. He stepped toward the door, every movement precise, controlled, and deadly. Alessia watched him, both terrified and mesmerized. The man she had known as a commanding, jealous presence at the gala was now a living, breathing force of danger, ready to strike at a moment's notice. Vincenzo opened the door just a crack, peering into the dimly lit corridor. A figure stood there, partially obscured by shadows. Vincenzo's expression didn't change, but Alessia could feel the tension radiating off him. He whispered something into his phone, and immediately, shadows of his security detail appeared, surrounding the figure before it could take another step. "You shouldn't have come here," Vincenzo said coldly, stepping forward. The figure hesitated, a flicker of fear in their eyes, before retreating into the night. The moment was brief, but it left Alessia shaken. She realized that danger wasn't abstract anymore, it was real, constant, and inescapable. Vincenzo turned to her, his expression softening just slightly, though the intensity in his eyes remained. "Do you understand now?" he asked quietly. "This isn't a game. Being near me, being near this life, it's dangerous. And I can't let anyone hurt you." Alessia felt her chest tighten, caught between fear and a strange, undeniable longing. She wanted to argue, to insist she could protect herself, but deep down, she knew she couldn't. Not against him, not against the world he controlled, not against the shadows that moved at his command. That night, Alessia lay awake, thinking about Vincenzo, about the danger that seemed to follow her, and about the impossible attraction that had developed between them. Every memory of his gaze, his touch, and his possessive words replayed in her mind, leaving her restless and conflicted. She was drawn to him, even as she feared him, and the line between fear and desire blurred in ways she couldn't untangle. Vincenzo, in the other room, was equally restless. His mind raced with strategies, threats, and protective plans. But despite the danger, despite the relentless tension of his life, Alessia's presence occupied his thoughts in ways no threat or calculation ever had. She was a complication he couldn't ignore, a fire he couldn't put out, and a temptation he couldn't resist. His jealousy wasn't just about possession, it was about ensuring her survival, controlling a world that was out of control, and protecting something he had never expected to care about this deeply. By morning, both of them were exhausted yet unable to rest fully. The city below moved on, unaware of the lives teetering on the edge of danger above. Alessia realized that her life had changed irrevocably. The gala, the jealous stares, the threats, none of it had been a prelude to ordinary life. She had stepped fully into a world of shadows, danger, and an impossible attraction that neither of them could deny. And Alessia knew, with a mixture of fear and anticipation, that the coming days would only deepen the stakes. Secrets would be revealed, danger would escalate, and the magnetic, perilous connection between her and Vincenzo Romano would be tested in ways that neither of them could have predicted. The city slept beneath a blanket of neon lights, but in Vincenzo Romano's penthouse, there was no rest. Alessia sat in the dim glow of the living room, the tension in her muscles a reflection of the storm brewing outside and within. She had learned quickly that nothing about Vincenzo's world was simple, every smile, every glance, every word carried weight. And the danger that shadowed them both was constant, like a predator circling silently, waiting for the perfect moment. Vincenzo entered the room without knocking, his presence immediately filling the space. He moved with the precision and authority of a man who controlled everything around him, yet Alessia noticed something she hadn't before, the subtle flicker of uncertainty in his eyes when he looked at her. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but it made her heart race in ways she couldn't explain. He approached, and the air between them seemed to ignite, charged with a tension that was almost unbearable. You can't let your guard down, he said, voice low and commanding, yet edged with something deeper, almost a warning. Every second you do, someone is watching. Every misstep could be fatal. Alessia nodded, trying to steady her nerves, but her thoughts betrayed her. She was not only terrified for her life, but inexplicably drawn to him, the same man whose jealousy had made her pulse quicken at the gala, whose possessiveness had kept her in constant awe and fear. The night was far from over. Vincenzo's phone buzzed insistently, each notification a reminder of the empire he commanded and the threats that loomed just outside their walls. He typed rapidly, issuing orders that ensured the building, and Alessia within it, remained untouched. She watched him, fascinated and unnerved. His hands were steady, his mind sharp, but every so often, he glanced at her with a possessiveness that was almost suffocating. Alessia realized that she was no longer just a guest in his life, she had become part of it, and that reality came with risks she had never imagined. Suddenly, the quiet was shattered by a faint noise, a soft thud from the terrace. Alessia's heart jumped, and Vincenzo's reaction was instantaneous. In one fluid motion, he was at the door, opening it just enough to peer into the shadows. Alessia held her breath, feeling the gravity of the situation tighten around her. She had experienced danger before in stories and whispers, but this, the tangible, immediate threat, was something else entirely. A figure moved in the darkness, attempting to retreat silently, but Vincenzo's instincts were faster. With a commanding voice, he shouted, and shadows of his security team appeared, surrounding the intruder before they could react. The figure froze, realizing the depth of Vincenzo's reach, the meticulous control he exerted even over threats that seemed miles away from the city below. Alessia's chest tightened, part fear, part fascination. She could feel the intensity of his protection, the dangerous allure of a man who could control everything, except, perhaps, the fire he felt for her. When the intruder was finally subdued, Vincenzo turned to Alessia, his expression a mixture of anger, relief, and something more subtle that made her heart skip a beat. "Do you understand now?" he asked, voice low and serious. "This world isn't forgiving. And being close to me, it puts you directly in the line of fire." Alessia nodded, words failing her. She felt the truth of it deep in her bones, the reality of the danger, the magnetic pull that kept her close despite the risks. He stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking until the air was thick with tension. "You're playing a dangerous game, Alessia," he whispered, eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that was almost unbearable. "Not just because of them, but because of me. And you have no idea how far I'll go to keep you safe, or how much I'll risk to have you." Alessia felt her chest tighten, torn between fear and desire, caught in a whirlwind she could neither escape nor resist. The following hours passed in a tense silence, punctuated only by the faint hum of the city and the occasional movement of Vincenzo's security detail. Alessia could feel the pull between them growing stronger with every moment, every glance, every subtle touch that lingered too long. She realized, with a mixture of dread and thrill, that she was no longer just a passive participant in this world, she was entwined with Vincenzo, bound by danger, obsession, and an attraction that neither of them could deny. Late into the night, Alessia finally gathered the courage to speak. "Why me?" she whispered, voice trembling with a mixture of fear and longing. Vincenzo's gaze softened ever so slightly, a flicker of vulnerability betraying the carefully constructed facade of control and dominance. "Because," he said simply, "you're the one person I can't lose. And the moment I realized that, I knew nothing would ever be the same. Not for me, not for you." Alessia's heart raced, caught between terror and the undeniable draw of a man who had become her protector, her danger, and her obsession all at once. As the first light of dawn crept into the penthouse, Alessia understood one undeniable truth: the world she had entered was far more dangerous and intoxicating than she could have imagined. And Vincenzo Romano, the jealous, possessive, and impossibly powerful man who dominated every aspect of that world, had become an inescapable part of her life. She didn't know what the future held, or whether she would survive the next threat, or the next moment with him, but one thing was certain: there was no turning back. She had been drawn into his world, and the game had only just begun.